world-renowned economist, Jeffrey Sachs. He's an economist with the Columbia University. Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for speaking with us. I want to first start with the India question because obviously there's a lot of interest around the Trump tariffs, the secondary tariffs on oil for purchasing Russian oil. Why do you think Trump has done that? Because India is not even the largest purchaser of Russian oil. Why is India getting punished?
Trump is not a very logical person and not a very strategic person. And so he does things impulsively. He thought that India would immediately agree to the demands that he made, that India would state, we will not buy Russian oil, and so forth. So this was a threat. India rightly did not succumb to the threat. It was not a well thought out strategy. Very little that Trump does is a well thought out strategy. What it has done, though, is to alert India to something that I've been saying for a long time, which is that India should not trust the United States as its main partner. India, of course, needs its independent foreign policy, and it should look with some care at statements and commitments by the United States. It was thought in India by some that India would become the close economic partner that would replace China's trade. I said that was naive. The United States is not going to accept large exports from India any more than it did from China. This is not my view of what the U.S. should do. It was my prediction of what the U.S. would do. So I warned against relying on the goodwill of the U.S. or thinking that India had some inside track on a good trade deal. I always thought that was an illusion. India also, at least some people thought, well, India should strategically align with the United States against China. I said that is absolutely the wrong approach. I am not a fan of the Quad. I'm not a fan of any idea that India looks to the U.S. In a security arrangement. It doesn't work. It won't work. And I think what Trump has done is to make clear, very clear, unfortunately clear, the points that I've been saying. The U.S. is not a reliable partner, especially under Trump, but I would say generally.
But Professor Sachs, I want to go back to the oil question, because if it is a question of principle, if there is even half an argument, logically speaking, that, look, by purchasing Russian oil or Russian gas, you're funding Putin's war machine. Look at China. China is the largest purchaser of Russian oil in the last 2.5 years. China has purchased $158 billion of Russian crude. India, on the other hand, has purchased $119 billion of Russian crude. So if it's about punishing those countries that are enabling Putin's war machine, why hasn't Trump imposed the same sanctions or the same tariffs on China?
Well, he tried to punish China, and China retaliated immediately, and it cut off exports of rare earths and rare earth magnets and other components vital for U.S. industry. And the United States backed down. You used the word principle. If it's a matter of principle, you said, this is not a matter of principle. This is a matter of threats. This is a matter of bluffing. This is a matter of what Trump decides to do impulsively, what he thinks he can get away with, who he thinks he can scare into submission. So if you're looking for consistency, you're certainly looking in the wrong place. It's not going to come from the U.S.
Why do you think ties have soured? I mean, obviously, this is a relationship between India and the United States that's been built over successive U.S. administrations from George W. Bush for the last 20, 25 years. Trump has basically appended it. I mean, this is the lowest point in the relationship since perhaps Nixon and Indira Gandhi, and that was, God knows, 50 years ago. Why would Trump completely throw such a relationship under the bus, and what is it that India can do to deal with the fallout of this?
First of all, as I said, Trump is not a strategist. He's not a logical thinker. He's not a consistent, far-sighted thinker. American foreign policy right now is impulsive. It's short-term. It doesn't work. So this is a starting point. Second, Trump thinks that he has all the cards, or he pretends that he has all the cards, or he bluffs that he has all the cards vis-a-vis any other country. So he thinks that the great prize of the US market, which is not so dominant, nor is it so important for India. It's helpful, but it's not so crucial. He thinks that that great prize gives him the leverage to make whatever demands he wants, even completely outlandish demands, say, of Brazil to stop a court case that's underway in a fully independent judiciary in Brazil. So don't look for long-term strategy. But if you want to know the underlying mood or motivation, the U.S. is flailing around because it's losing its dominance. And it's trying to reestablish its dominance. It's trying to reestablish fear. It wants India to be submissive to the U.S. It wants Russia to be submissive to the U.S. It wants China to be submissive to the U.S. It wants the BRICS to somehow go away. It's not going to happen. The world has changed. The world is multipolar. There are many great powers, Russia, India, China, the United States. There's not the U.S. alone. What should India do? India should be careful. India should align with the BRICS on the basic proposition that we are in a multipolar world, that no single country, and that means the United States, can boss other countries around. No single country should rearrange the international trading system on whims or threats coming from one person. Remember, in the United States, we don't even have a constitutional process underway for these tariffs. This is a one-person show, and he has no legal authority, no constitutional authority for this. We don't know whether our courts will stand up to him, but that's the truth. So India is doing the right thing. Prime Minister Modi spoke to President Lula. Prime Minister Modi is meeting with President Xi Jinping. Prime Minister Modi is meeting with President Putin. That's the right approach. That the BRICS say, wait a minute, we are not going to be bossed around by one country.
Do you also think, Professor Sachs, that the reason why Trump is in such a spiteful mood, if I can use that phrase, is because India's not given him credit for bringing about a ceasefire between India and Pakistan when there was this 4-day war that happened back in May, and Trump has been going on and on and on, claiming credit for that ceasefire, bringing that war to an end. We saw the ceremony that happened last week in the White House with the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia, and he's going around saying he's stopped about half a dozen conflicts in the last 6 months. You think that's why he's being so spiteful?
Anything's possible. But if that is the truth, it just shows you how completely irrational the situation is right now. I don't discount it. It's possible. I can't get into that man's head. But what I can tell you is there is no strategy, there's no trustworthiness, there's no consistency, and there's no success from all of this flailing around.
Trump and Putin are meeting later this week in Alaska. This is the first face-to-face meeting that they'll have in the 6 months that Trump has been in office. He's been desperately asking for this meeting. Putin was sort of not really interested. What can we expect when both leaders meet in Alaska? Do you genuinely think that there will be, if not an end to the war, at least some kind of a temporary ceasefire?
I think that there will be an actual improvement in the relations between the two countries in some sense. Remember, these countries have a lot more at stake than the Ukraine war. They have at stake the diplomatic relations. They have at stake the rapidly collapsing nuclear arms control framework. They have economic issues, the removal of the sanctions, joint ventures, and so forth that would be mutually beneficial. And there is also the war in Ukraine. I doubt that this meeting would be called for Trump to try to lord it over Putin or to have a failed summit. But I think it's important to recognize that there are a number of things that can and will be discussed other than the war in Ukraine. As to the war in Ukraine, the United States should do one basic thing, and that is to say that NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine, and say it publicly, and say it clearly, because that is the reason why this war occurred, and that is the basis for ending the war. To say it requires going against the CIA and the deep state and the long-term anti-Russia strategy of the United States, but it's the truth. This war came from 30 years of the United States pushing its military right up against Russia's borders. And for the war to stop, the United States has to stop that provocation.
What about on the ground? Trump has been talking about land swaps, and you give away some part of Ukraine, you freeze the conflict. Putin gets to keep the eastern part, the Donbass. Zelensky says that's an absolute no-go. The Constitution bars him from doing so. What about on the ground? What will it take for Putin to stop this war?
Well, there are a few points. There are three areas of concern. One is Crimea. Crimea has been home to Russia's naval fleet in the Black Sea since 1783. When the U.S. helped to overthrow a neutral government in Ukraine in February 2014, which started this war, a U.S. joined coup. Immediately, the new post-coup regime said Russia should leave Crimea. Russia's never going to leave Crimea. That is the place of their naval fleet and naval power and ability to project power into the Eastern Mediterranean. And so Crimea is staying with Russia, no doubt. Then there is the Donbass, two oblasts, Lugansk and Donetsk. These are heavily ethnic Russian regions. They broke away after the February 2014 coup. Russia tried a treaty not based on annexation, but based on autonomy for these regions in 2015, 2016, called the Minsk II agreements. The U.S. blew up the Minsk II agreements. It told Ukraine, you don't have to implement them. That is why these oblasts are never going back to Ukraine as well. Then there are two oblasts, Zaporizhia and Kherson, where Russia's claim is much weaker. It came in November 2022. It's probably in part negotiable. This language of land swaps, by the way, is a bit absurd and misleading. Nobody knows what it means, but what it seems to mean is that Russia would give up some of its claim in Kherson and Zaporizhia, which is its claim, in return for receiving, in some sense, recognition of its claim in Lugansk and Donetsk. Right. There will have to be territorial changes. By the way, Ukraine will not accept them. That's their problem. The United States can accept them. These are negotiations between the U.S. and Russia. They are not negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. The U.S. should get out of this war. It started this war. It dragged Ukraine into it. Ukraine was not a completely innocent victim. It was a fool. I told the Ukrainians for years, the U.S. is going to bring you to disaster, just like the U.S. brought Vietnam to disaster, Afghanistan to disaster, and countless other countries. And the Ukrainians didn't believe me, but this is the situation. But the negotiations this Friday are between the U.S. and Russia, and they should be a way for the U.S. to extricate itself and to end its participation in a war that it didn't start. I'd advise Ukraine to get real also. I'd advise Europe to get real also. All this warmongering against a nuclear superpower is nuts. It's very dangerous, and it neglects all the history of how this conflict came about.
All right, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us with your thoughts and perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.